Hello all and welcome to this wonderful Monday. I hope you had a great weekend. Let's get started. So you on Friday went over the 3 parts of the cell theory. Please list them. And you also did an ed puzzle on different types of cells and specialized cells, which is great because that's what we're going to be working on this week. Your only homework that is due this week is your Quizlet, which will be due on Thursday. And then your test on this portion of the content will be next Monday, the day before break. And just to give you a little information, half the test will be on classification again. So half of it you already know. So it's just the stuff this week, which should be a bit of review with a little bit more in there for you to know. So let's jump into that. You need to turn to page 22 in your note packet. We're going to start talking about the cell structures that are commonly found in plants, animals, and bacteria. Our first organelle is the cell membrane or the plasma membrane. This is a phospholipid bilayer. That's the outermost part of the cell and it controls what enters and leaves the cell. This is eukaryotic and prokaryotic type of organelle. It is found in every single cell. It is required by every single cell. Now, if you notice, I said phospholipid bilayer. Now, if you remember, lipids are really, really anti-water. So that's one of the reasons they make such a good membrane is they protect the water going in and out. So the inside of the lipids are hydrophobic, which means they don't like the water and keep the water from passing through, and the outside like water, so they will attract molecules, but they are the protective barrier of the cell. The next one is the cytoplasm. This is the jelly inside. Its job is to hold everything in place inside and allow for transport and passage. This is found between the cell membrane and the nuclear membrane. This functions where organelles are suspended. And that's its main job, is to hold those up and in place. This is also something you find in all types of cells, eukaryotic and prokaryotic. The cytoskeleton. It's the protein skeleton of a cell. So there's actually cytoskeleton in the cell that you normally never see in any model you have seen of cells because they take up so much space. They're throughout the cytoplasm. If you look, there are these green bar-like structures in the picture here. They act kind of like a highway or give scaffolding like in a building and give actual support and maintains shape and helps move materials in the cell. This is also found in all types of cells. We also have the Golgi apparatus or Golgi complex or Golgi body. These are stacks of flattened sacs arranged on the edge of the cell floating in the cytoplasm. Their job is to pack and ship all of the waste and substances out of the cell. They're kind of like UPS. They pack and ship everything that the cell needs and either transports it out of the cell or to another location in the cell that is needed. This is only found in eukaryotic cells. A lysosome is a sphere, rather larger than a ribosome, that are found floating in cytoplasm. It functions to produce enzymes, which if you remember are proteins, that in this case are specifically used to break down food, bacteria, waste material, broken things, old pieces. They're kind of like the stomach of the cell. They digest everything. So they're kind of like the garbage cleaners and the janitors of the cell. This is strictly eukaryotic and more heavily an animal than plant, surprisingly enough. The next one's one you should all remember quite well, the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. This is a rod-shaped structure with a double membrane, kind of looks like a kidney bean. It's found floating in the cytoplasm. It is where the cell's energy is made, and that energy is in the form of ATP. This is strictly eukaryotic. The nucleus. It is a large sphere in the center of the cell. It is the control center. The office contains all of the info the cell needs to survive. This is found strictly in eukaryotic organisms, so animals, plants, fungi, protists. The nucleus is covered by its own membrane, which is called the nuclear membrane or nuclear envelope. This is another phospholipid bilayer, so protected by fats. Keeps out all of the positively or negatively charged or polar charged particles in water. This surrounds the nucleus and it controls what enters and leaves, just like the cell membrane does for the cell itself. This is strictly eukaryotic. The nucleolus is that small little dark sphere that you see kind of sitting off to the side in the nucleus, just floating in that nucleus and nucleoplasm. This is where actually our ribosomes are made. So the nucleolus makes ribosomes, and I would put a star beside this because everybody always forgets this, and we come back to this one actually quite a bit. So the nucleolus makes the ribosomes. And this, again, since we're part of the nucleus here, is strictly eukaryotic. Nuclear pores. These are the holes embedded in the membrane of the nucleus. These are the doors, the windows, the gateways into the nucleus. They're very tiny though, so only very particular things can pass through. So this, again, as it being part of the nucleus, is strictly eukaryotic. Ribosomes. Ribosomes are teeny tiny dots found throughout the cytoplasm or attached to the rough ER. They're everywhere. Their job is to make proteins. They're the protein makers of the cell. You can find ribosomes in every type of cell. Bacteria, fungus, prokaryotes, eukaryotes, animal, plant, protist, anything that is made up of a cell has ribosomes because you need proteins. Speaking of proteins, let's move into the ER categories. So we have two different endoplasmic reticulums. We have the rough and the smooth. The rough is called that because it's covered with ribosomes. So these are a bunch of hollow canals with ribosomes attached, and they're connected to the nuclear membrane, and they create a passage from there to the cell membrane. They assemble and transport proteins. They do not make the proteins, that is the ribosome's job, but they assemble them and transport them and get them ready for packaging to be shipped off to the Golgi next, or to wherever else they need in the cell. This one, strictly eukaryotic. You can actually see this in action. So what happens is the ribosome produces that sort of ribboned protein, because if you remember in primary phase, it's just this string of amino acids. A vesicle, which is kind of like a carrying pod for that information, pinches off and just ships somewhere else. The smooth ER is the same type of canals that go from nuclear envelope in the nucleus to the cell membrane, except for there's no ribosomes. This particular organelle's job is to make lipids, so steroids, steroids, repair pieces for the rest of the cell membrane, other functioning pieces and other organelles, but its main job is to make lipids and transport them. This again, strictly eukaryotic. Organelles mean eukaryotic. There's only a few organelles that are in all cells, and these ones have their own special membranes, which make them unique. And it's all connected. Everything that goes from the nucleus to the rough and smooth ER will be transported to the Golgi for packing and shipping and then out. So it's one big assembly line, almost like a factory. So, vacuoles. And I jumped ahead because that was an in-between slide, so I'm not worried about that one so much. Vacuoles are little tiny storage sacs floating in the cytoplasm. We usually keep food, waste, secretions, broken bits until they're ready to digest, or shipping material in those. They're strictly eukaryotic, but we usually don't show them in animal pictures because they're relatively clear. They're hard to see, so we're not usually showing a vacuole. Cilia and flagella. Cilia and flagella are two separate transport tools on the outside of a cell. Cilia are many little hairs. So it looks like teeny like millipede legs on the outside of the cell. So they're little hairs that help with movement. And flagella is one whip-like type tail on one end of the cell, which allows for movement, just like sperm cells. Sperm cells have that tail, that's a flagella. These are always on the outside of the cell, and they're used for moving and the movement of materials. This is strictly prokaryotes and animal cells only. Plants do not have these. They don't need to move like that. So this is strictly animal cells and prokaryotes. So if you flip, so we've gone through page 23 and page 22. We're going to move on to 24, and then we're almost done. So we're going to talk now about the three structures found only in plant cells, some bacteria, and some protists. So on to the plant cell. Woo! If you note, the animal cells that have been referenced are very round in shape. Plant cells are very boxy. And that is because of this first organelle. Cell wall. So the cell wall is a very thick, non-living portion of the cell. It contains cellulose, which, as you know, is a sugar. Remember me mentioning that was a hard-to-digest sugar for our system. Corn has a lot of that. This is on the very outside of the cell membrane, so right here is the membrane, and then here is the wall. It's very rigid, so it helps protect and support the plant and gives it shape. So this is some plants, this is all plants and some prokaryotes. Next one is the central vacuole. Now, animals, I did say, had vacuoles. However, plants have one gigantic central vacuole. It is the biggest organelle in all of the cells. It floats in the cytoplasm. It's a storage site for water, waste products, food, broken bits, secretions, because plants don't have a lot of lysosomes. They don't have a lot of janitors to clean up, so everything just gets shoved into one spot. It's like a landfill mixed with food storage, mixed with spare parts, gigantic warehouse, which doesn't sound very pleasant, but that's how it works for them. And this is strictly plant cells that do this. They have this gigantic central vacuole. And last but not least is the chloroplast. And the chloroplast and the mitochondria are going to become very, very important next unit. Our entire unit is on chloroplasts and mitochondria and what they do. But it's kind of a football-shaped structure. It's green, double membrane, sitting in the cytoplasm, and its job is photosynthesis. So it captures light energy. This is strictly plant cells. Now, some bacteria and protists can photosynthesize, but they don't need the chloroplast because they have the chemicals to do it. They just don't need to make a lot of food. Whereas a plant needs to make a ton of food because it's much larger, just like an animal cell needs mitochondria for energy too. Because we're bigger, we need more. Without the chloroplast and the mitochondria, less energy can be created and used and made for our systems. So that works great for bacteria because they're tiny. But we can't function like that. So, this ends our tour. Please pay close attention to the anatomy of these two things. You need to know what an animal cell and a plant cell look like. And we're going to talk about that in tomorrow's lecture, the differences between prokaryote and eukaryote, animal and plant that you need to know. All right, that's it for me.